أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن في اختلاف الليل والنهار وما خلق الله في السماوات والأرض وما خلق الله في السماوات والأرض لآيات لقوم يتقون. إن الذين لا يرجون لقاءنا ورضوا بالحياة الدنيا واطمأنوا بها واطمأنوا بها والذين هم عن آياتنا غافلون. إن في اختلاف الليل والنهار وما خلق الله في السماوات والأرض لآيات لقوم يتقون. إن الذين لا يرجون لقاءنا ورضوا بالحياة الدنيا واطمأنوا بها والذين هم عن آياتنا غافلون. أولئك مأواهم النار بما كانوا يكسبون. إن الذين لا يرجون لقاءنا ورضوا بالحياة الدنيا واطمأنوا بها والذين هم عن آياتنا إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات يهديهم ربهم بإيمانهم إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات يهديهم ربهم بإيمانهم تجري من تحتهم الأنهار في جنات النعيم دعواهم فيها سبحانك اللهم وتحيتهم فيها سلام وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. دعواهم فيها سبحانك اللهم وتحيتهم فيها سلام وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. ولو يعجل الله للناس الشر استعجالهم بالخير لقضي إليهم أجلهم فنذر الذين لا يرجون لقاءنا في طغيانهم يعمهون. وإذا مس الإنسان الضر دعانا لجنبه أو قاعدا أو قائما فلما كشفنا عنه ضره مر كأن لم يدعنا إلى ضر مسه كذلك زين للمسرفين ما كانوا يعملون. فلما كشفنا عنه ضره مسه كذلك زين للمسرفين ما كانوا يعملون فلما كشفنا عنه ضره مر كأن لم يدعنا إلى ضر مسه كذلك زين للمسرفين ما كانوا يعملون صدق الله العظيم.
تكبير. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. First, we thank our Sheikh Hassan for reciting what he recited and the way he recited. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to hear his speech in the best of fashions. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for softening our hearts with the verses of the Quran. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue guiding us with these verses and with our iman. Just before we begin, something to think about as far as the verses that were recited from Surah Yunus and how amazing are those verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us multiple remedies in just the span of a few verses that the Shaykh read. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that those people who don't yearn or don't expect their meeting with Allah, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ لَا يَرْجُونَ لِقَاءَنَا, they are not willing and they're actually pushing away their meeting with Allah. وَرَضُوا بِالْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, and they became very satisfied. Radi, in Urdu we say razi, of this world. And it became a source of comfort for them to the point where this is where they want to stay. They believe that this is their ultimate station. وَطْمَأَنُّوا بِهَا, they became very, very satisfied with it. And they're the ones who are on the verses or the signs of Allah, ghafilun. They're very forgetful of the signs of Allah. So put these three together. This is just one part of this verse. Look at the formula that Allah is forming in our minds just by His speech, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who are not willing to meet Allah, they have no hopes, no desire, no aspiration to meet Allah. They become very satisfied with this world until it's become their station and they don't want to leave it. And they're very neglectful, they're forgetful of the signs of Allah. In another portion, and I'll bring this all together inshallah, in another portion Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this part is very, very beautiful because Allah is giving us the remedy and a power that we have that we didn't expect that we had. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, those who believe in Allah, what is with them? Where is their ending? What's their place in this world? يَهْدِيهِمْ رَبُّهُمْ بِإِيمَانِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to guide them with their iman. So if you think that you don't have enough for guidance, if you have iman in Allah, know that that sincerity of just of having iman is enough to guide you to the right path and continue being guided. But you have to believe, number one, that that guidance is true, and you have to believe that that guidance is from Allah and He's going to guide you with that iman. How many of us have had a gut feeling and we know that our nafs is telling us to do something, but there's some light that comes in through Islam and iman, and you say, you know what? I don't think Islam will permit this, even though I have a very strong feeling about this, right? That means that this verse, you had an opportunity that this verse had worked on you. And this is an evidence of that verse within yourself. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us with our iman, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the iman of the Nabiyyin and the Siddiqeen and the Shuhada and the Salihin. Allahumma ameen. So to begin, inshallah, today's issue, we're going to keep it a little short, inshallah, maybe a half an hour, possibly a little more, and then we'll have question and answer. There's a certain type of fatigue that can build in naturally when something happens and an event unfolds and a conflict occurs and God forbid a genocide occurs. And it happens and it doesn't stop and it keeps going. It's very easy to lose hope and lose momentum. It's very easy to happen because we're human beings and we're weak. Our emotions maybe run out, we get busy with other things, and then we get plagued with hopelessness. What if I was to tell you that the people who are responsible for this genocide in Gaza and in other parts of the world, they're hoping that this fatigue settles in and that support goes away, because that entity itself is very driven by PR and public opinion, and they're losing the war on public opinion for sure. I know we talked about this before, but when the protests originally began, the support that was there for the people of Palestine, of Gaza, was at 64% of the people protesting and activists online. And rest of the support was pro-Israel. Now we're at a time where it's 95 to 97% support for Palestine and the people of Gaza, and the rest is dwindling amongst the pro-Israelis. Why am I mentioning this? To let you know that your momentum had worked, and the tweets that you had sent out, the protests that you had went to, and the reminders that you gave to your people, and this constant talk about sending messages on WhatsApp groups, thinking that if I was just to share this, hopefully it was going to work, but guess what? It worked. And you have to continue. This is a moment that people are starting to think, and imagine the propaganda. I'm going to talk a little bit about propaganda and then get more into the Islamiyat of this. Propaganda is very, very, very important to the Zionist entity of Israel. They thrive and they've built this narrative and hoping that this narrative was going to last forever, painting themselves in front of the world for the past 70 plus years as the victims. And now the narrative is no longer working because the whole world sees who the real victims are. And they're none other than the people of Gaza and Palestine, and obviously now the West Bank, right? They said it was just Gaza and just Hamas that we had to get rid of. But there's no Hamas in the West Bank. Why are you focusing so much on the West Bank now? Why are you obliterating the West Bank? Why are you having all the men come out, sitting, and pardon my language, you've all probably have seen it, but sitting in their underwears, lining them up in front of their families, humiliating them in front of their families, and them still having a bold face in front of the world saying, Israel's not an apartheid state. It is an apartheid state, and it is a terrorist state. And I'm very bold in saying that. These are my words. These are not the words of the masjid. These are not the words of our beloved Sheikh sitting here. These are my personal words, and I'm fully responsible for these words. Israel has been seen now and understood to be a genocidal, terroristic, barbaric state. Everything that they've been accusing the Palestinians of, the whole world sees their plans. And since the whole world sees their plans, and from the other side, they thought that their people were going to be contained. Ehud Barak, Naftali, and many other people are now whispering throughout the media and in the ears of the Israelis that there's this 80-year theory. Have you guys heard of the 80-year theory? What's the 80-year theory? Anybody heard of it? The 80-year theory is that the Israelis have talked about from their own people, their previous prime ministers, that the Israelis will never rule, and the Jewish entities, even from the past, will never rule more than 80 years. And historically, they haven't ruled more than 80 years. And Ehud Barak was saying that since we have about 2 years encroaching onto us, something's bound to happen. It's just a theory, it's their theory, right? And you can get into what a lifetime is considered, or a generation, which is 40 years, and it's been two basically generations. And when the Israeli media machine hears that its own people are saying that something's about to happen because 80 years are encroaching upon us, that's even more pressure for this narrative, right? And they actually are in a situation now where the world is saying that we thought that this terrorist attack was fully done by Hamas, which even that has been overturned. First they started with 1,400 casualties, then they went with 1,200 casualties, then more photo evidence, video evidence came out of Apache helicopters and of them killing their own people, their own civilians. Those 1,200 that they claimed, many of those people were used as human shields by themselves, by the Israelis, and Apache helicopters that were firing down at these people. And the casualties were actually, maybe even the majority of the casualties were done by Israel. But the narrative, look at the phases now. Let's talk about the phases. There was a phase since October 7th, even though the Muslim world, rest assured, the Muslim world has been talking about the atrocities of Israel for the past 70 plus years. It was a breath of fresh air when people were finally listening to the Muslims when this incident happened on October 7th. But it wasn't that October 6th, everyone was living in harmony, everything was peaceful. It was never that way. It's just the world didn't know about it because Israel locked down millions of dollars monthly to control this narrative. So phase one was a phase of confusion. It was what I kind of refer to as the phase of condemning, where Muslims were still kind of worried. They didn't know where this was going to go. And we still thought that we had, or we could control the situation, but the control we knew ultimately was from Allah. And we were not sure, and we saw in the headlines, even Muslim entities and news agencies saying the war between Hamas and Israel, when it wasn't the case. It was always between the Palestinians and Israel. But the dilemma, even with this phase one, there's many phases. Phase one, the dilemma was that Israel was the occupying force. How does the occupied, how are they considered people that are even going to wage a war? There's no such thing as a war. And a rebellion is not even a rebellion when there's an occupier itself. So it was oxymoronic, this whole situation. And it never actually made sense. Because if you're occupied by a terrorist state and you react to it, that's still not considered terrorism. But for example's sake, let's say that it was. And then that phase finished, and the whole world started finding out in phase two, because the whole world was still condemning Hamas and being asked to condemn Hamas. How can you side with Hamas? Siding with the Palestinians is considered siding with Hamas. Saying slogans of Gaza is Hamas, because Hamas was elected democratically by the Gazans, so all of the Gazans are complicit in whatever Hamas does. That narrative went away, and then phase two began where the whole world was like, wait, what's going on here? Have we been lied to? And that's phase two, have we been lied to? Phase three was, we've been lied to. And trillions of dollars went into this false narrative of Israel when we and our taxpayers, I'm talking about the Americans, our taxpayer money has went to genocide of women and children and elderly and just civilians. And then the world started realizing, how is it that as of now, all the bombings that happened, I want all of us to just make sense of this. How is it that the official number is anywhere between 70 to 80 Hamas fighters were killed in this entire conflict? 70 to 80 top officials, maybe 10. And you're claiming that you're bombing Gaza to get to the Hamas, but Hamas barely died compared to the 20,000 plus that have been killed. The narrative is such a lie that the people saw this, the American public saw this. And then they started researching into other issues that they may have been lied to. And they started talking about big pharma because of this Gaza issue on a very deep level, the food industry, the boycotts that started occurring. And people originally were like, what are we going to do as far as BDS is concerned? BDS starts getting activated, mobilizing. Israel now, through its media, if I want to say media manipulation, I don't want to give them any credit. Media manipulation and being manipulative, called BDS out and said whoever supports BDS is anti-Semitic, right? And Muslims have talked about this all along, but then non-Muslims from the West were saying, wait, how are Palestinians anti-Semitic when they're Semitic? How does that work? How have you used now, the Holocaust comes in, the Holocaust card comes in, it doesn't work because people are seeing through it. How long are you going to use a Holocaust card? What happened was atrocious, but how are you performing a Holocaust on the Palestinians when you're claiming that the Holocaust is evil? You're doing the same exact thing to the Palestinians. All of these phases are unraveling. Allah's opening and unraveling all of this for the world. And we thought, I mean, we still have to keep trying, that we have to still try our best to uncover and uncover. But the fact that Gaza occurred uncovered so many atrocities of this world, not just of what's happening in Gaza. So Gaza ends up being this guiding light for the entire world. And people start becoming Muslim in the next phase in droves. It's just happening one after the other. Everything that a believer wished for to happen in the West and to the world was happening, but not the way we wanted. It wasn't going to be on our terms. It was going to be on Allah's terms, of Allah giving the people of Gaza shahada, Jannah, without any reckoning for what was happening to them, and their dead are martyrs, insha'Allah. Allah is giving them shahada for what they've endured, and now the whole world on the other side is unraveling all these truths which they were once lied to about. And it keeps going. Nobody wants to talk about this. I'll talk about this. I'll say it's my own words because the name of this person is very taboo, but I'm using this as an example. Osama bin Laden came back into the media, even though he was killed, supposedly. How does that happen? It wasn't by Muslims. Non-Muslims researched this letter to America that Osama bin Laden once wrote. He wrote this in 2002. In the beginning, I think it was February or March of 2002, of a letter to America. And this letter to America, did anybody read? Well, I shouldn't ask you to raise your hands. It's probably a security issue. I saw a brother just go like this and go like this. So this is all my responsibility, brothers and sisters. I'm bringing this up on my own accord. The masjid is not responsible for this. I'm 100% responsible for this. But it's the point that the non-Muslims saw this letter, they dug it up, blasted on social media, and to non-Muslims, not Muslims, he starts becoming like a next Che Guevara. He starts becoming this next, almost like a war hero. I heard non-Muslims say, and you can watch the TikToks, you can watch the social media, that I don't know if you guys watched that, somebody compiled a whole a bunch of TikTok reels and put it on YouTube, on a YouTube short, and then YouTube as a video, that this one girl who was taught this narrative, she's probably like in her early 20s or mid-20s, she said, y'all gotta watch this. I'm telling you, you're gonna be surprised. I saw this and I felt like my whole world changed and I don't know what to believe anymore, right? I'll get to what the main point here is. Non-Muslims see this and they start publishing this. It's not Muslims that are doing this. Independent News, which is called independent for a reason, has it on its website for years, 2 decades probably, takes it down because it said people misunderstood the context. So it was called independent news. The reason why it's called independent news is because it's not bound by anybody. It's on people's donations. So they can talk about anything they like, supposedly, right? And all these other news agencies take it down, but it gets blasted by a whole bunch of people in the West. it reaches Ireland, it reaches Russia, and all of a sudden people are considering making these t-shirts of Osama bin Laden, non-Muslims. Now Muslims, the thing that I found kind of humorous, Muslims were like, they wanted to celebrate, but then they stopped. They almost hiccuped the celebration because like, if we celebrate, maybe this is a ploy for Muslims to raise their hands so they can get visitations. So they were like, let everybody else do the work here because there's a security issue here. Wallahu alam. The dilemma here is how much money was spent by international governments, or just the US, of painting a narrative of this individual who was acclaimed to be behind September 11th. Trillions of dollars for this narrative. The acts of the Patriot Act, all of these were infused by this one individual, supposedly, and a group that he was with, which I'm not going to mention here. Trillions of dollars, taxpayer money, all of that. Do you think when the Americans, you tell them their trillions of dollars of tax money went in a false narrative, you think they're going to stay quiet? No one's going to stay quiet. No Muslim or non-Muslim who's American is going to stay quiet about that. This is what I mean by Gaza unraveled multiple facets of this world on so many astronomical, which ended up being catastrophic levels. And it continues. And it continues. Now, the world is, and CNN, how this works is, when CNN kind of pushes back on the narrative, that means that America may be trying to tell Israel to calm down on this genocide because you're out of control. I want you guys to think of Israel as people referring to it as this crazy narcissistic maniac now, which can't stop. Even the world forces that were kind of pushing Israel is like, oh my God, this is getting out of hand now. But Israel knows that the West needs it in the Middle East. Israel is the foothold of basically the United States and the West generally in the Middle East, and it needs to quote unquote survive to get all the intelligence for the rest of the Muslim world of what's happening so it can report back to the United States, which is why the United States has to support Israel to know what's happening. America can't physically be there, so they give all the best technology, all the best surveillance, all the best intelligence, all the best high-end weaponry for Israel to test out on the Palestinians the same way that Chinese technology is used on the Uyghurs. The highest of technology is first, even the weapons are tested out on the Palestinians, and if it works, then America obviously implements to its own capacity, wallahu alam how it's done. To make a long story short, Israel knows it's necessary, so what does it do? It becomes narcissistic. America needs me, I can do whatever I want now. And if America tells me to calm down, I'm not going to calm down because this is in my interest, but America needs me, so I have the upper hand now. This is where Israel was for the past few weeks, basically. So how does America hone in and reel or attempts to reel Israel back in? Uses media because it knows that Israel's afraid of the media. There's a war within America and Israel, media war that's occurring. By having people come on CNN and now refer to what's happening to the Palestinians, ethnic cleansing and genocidal, and having Muslims on referring it to as ethnic cleansing and genocidal. And that's where it actually hurts Israel the most. When you see on CNN where they're referring it to as ethnic cleansing and genocide and referring to Israel as an apartheid state, know that America is using CNN to put pressure on Israel because Israel's out of control now. The difficult thing for us as humans, as Muslims, is that there's been lots of Muslims that have been killed. Unfortunately, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. The reason why the believer doesn't stop working and stop mobilizing is because he knows and she knows as believers that our dead are martyrs. وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Don't think for 1 second that the ones who are dead as martyrs, that they're dead. Don't call them dead. Rather, they're with their Creator and Allah is giving them sustenance and provision. So that's the difficult part for us to see this bloodshed and these atrocities. But the other thing is now, what are political analysts saying? That has gone too far and that Israel is in self-destruct mode and can't see it. It's destroying itself. The whole world is telling it to stop. It should now at least listen to its enemies. It's not even listening to its friends, which lets you know that it's in self-destruct mode and it's actually destroying itself, and there's an implosion occurring. Netanyahu originally, or even before this conflict, Israel was torn to pieces and disunited because of Netanyahu and wanted him to leave. When he carried through with this conflict, he has to win this conflict in order for it to get the people's support. And he says we're going to keep pushing and pushing. In that delusion of keep on pushing, and thinking that something good is going to come out of it for themselves, they're actually self-imploding when the whole world can see it and they can't see it. Irreparable change, obviously. Those of us who are asking for a ceasefire, of course, we're asking for a ceasefire because we don't want anything more to happen. That pause that they had was not really a ceasefire. They were bombing when this pause happened. They like to call it another word, which was a pause. And the reason why I'm telling us all this is just to get up to date, to see what's happening, right? And to see within this the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now, as we move forward, we have some people that condemned as far as, Turkey is concerned, but nobody is actually going to do anything. We've fully understood that. What is Allah teaching us within this? In the beginning, we were crying out to the armies, what are you going to do to mobilize? To your neighbors of Gaza. They didn't do anything, and I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, they're not going to do anything. They're not allowed to do anything. And they fully convinced us, because when these leaders, 2 or 3 of them that were condemning, they're still making multi-million-dollar daily transactions with Israel on oil and gas. If they really wanted to, if Turkey really wanted to, they could say, we're not going to deal oil with you and gas, and it would obliterate the economy of Israel. Israel would no longer exist. But the first one, while this was happening, Mohammed bin Salman and Erdogan were actually fighting to see who's going to have a higher bid to work with Israel while this conflict was happening. So those are just words from them. They're actually not going to do anything. But why am I saying this? We thought the only hope that the Muslim world has were the armies of the Muslim world. And that ended up not being true, because the change in everything that's occurring has been with us, the people who are talking about it, the people who are sending out tweets, the people who are giving durus about Masjid al-Aqsa in Gaza, the people who are supporting initiatives about Masjid al-Aqsa, the people who are protesting. The boycotts people said wouldn't matter, but why is Gaza very specific? What was the news? The numbers are more, but who saw the news of how much Starbucks lost because of this boycott? In 2 months. Do you know? Anybody know? 3 days ago, it was $11.8 billion. $11.8 billion of what they've reported. Some said that there's more. Now, why is that important about Starbucks? And why is Starbucks being made an example out of? You know how when somebody's all complacent in a crime and one gets caught and he gets the brunt of the stick when everyone was all a part of it? We say in Urdu like bichara Starbucks, like poor miskeen Starbucks took the hit for everybody, right? The reason is now corporations see this and they say, wow, this is real now. This BDS thing, this boycott is real. I don't want to be made an example like Starbucks was. And Starbucks is the creme de la creme. It's the cream of the crop. If Starbucks is affected by $11.8 billion, I better either disavow myself for Israel or just not illegally show my records of what I'm actually giving to Israel. Whatever the case may be, there's multiple scenarios. But what we did worked. Allah is empowering us through Gaza. Those people who are leaders, who had the opportunity to mobilize armies or at least make a legitimate threat and cut off some type of oil and gas, rather they ramped themselves up more during this conflict, and then in front of the world condemning and calling Netanyahu the butcher of Gaza, but at the same time still with their deals, they actually never actually had any power. But we were actually the ones who had power. The people of Iman actually had power. And those who we thought had power actually didn't have any power. And Allah showed us through Gaza. Why am I mentioning all of this, brothers and sisters? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who holds power, and He unravels that power in situations whenever He likes. We wanted the Gaza issue to end when it happened as a Muslim ummah, but it didn't. And only that wisdom was with Allah. But those wisdoms we're beginning to see now. We're beginning to see every single leader in the Muslim world buckling now, because they're seeing that the Muslim world that they've been holding down for so long actually has more power than them. And not even just Muslims, it's been non-Muslims that have been rallying in percentage-wise in astronomical numbers. And people coming into the fold of Islam, making TikTok videos about the Quran, right? All these people were following, look, it's really good to see when people come into the fold of Islam, what brought them to Islam. It gives us inspiration. Those of you who are wondering, why is it that we ask people, right, especially in a masjid setting, why do you ask people when they come into the fold of Islam, why they came into the fold of Islam? You know why? Because their iman guides us. Didn't Allah say, يَهْدِيهِمْ رَبُّهُمْ بِإِيمَانِهِمْ? Allah guides them with their iman. Well, when people come into the fold of Islam, they give us a scenario of why they came into the fold of Islam, and we never even thought about that, right? And those people who aren't even Muslim, and they're reading the Quran and telling us how the Quran changed their hearts, even though some of them are not Muslim yet, that itself rectifies our iman and raises our iman. So please, my message in saying all of this is, please don't suffer the burnout. Continue mobilizing whatever it is that you're doing, and continue. If you think that your social media post is not going to work, it is, because it did. Continue raising the awareness. Don't let people tell you this is full of hopelessness. No, because it's not. The Ummah of Muhammad never becomes hopeless. Do you think that this is the greatest catastrophe, even though this is great? Just think about what happened in Syria, just as far as numbers are concerned. Approximately 1 million people killed in Syria by its own Prime Minister, Bashar al-Assad. 1 million people. But the fact that Gaza's numbers are not nearly as close, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi. It's so difficult to say that because one human life is so beautiful and so dignified and so beloved to Allah. But Gaza is very, very different. And the beautiful thing about Gaza, the last thing I'll focus on, is the fact that Gaza came out and went through this trial and tribulation and became shaheed. People are now focusing on all of the other atrocities and thinking and knowing that we got a really big mission ahead of us for raising awareness about all this. And we're not going to let the enemy anymore play the victim card. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us this continuum and continuation of zeal. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to those who have died in Palestine, in Gaza, and in the West Bank, under this occupation, this apartheid occupation, and this terrorist occupation, to give them a shahada, Ya Rab, to give them the death of martyrs, Ya Rab, and to rectify our iman, Ya Rab, to make sure that when this stops, that this never happens again. Ya Allah, put the ummah in a situation that if this was ever to happen again, put us in a situation where people hesitate to do this to the Muslim ummah, where they say they got a whole group of people that are willing to support these people. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our iman. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the zeal to continue to be the people of Iman. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. If anybody has any questions or comments, we can take those for the next 5 to 10 minutes, inshallah, and then we conclude. Yes, sir.
Are there any resources that we can use to take a look at the statistics that you mentioned? I know a lot of them is like talk about Starbucks losses, but also sort of turning narrative
Yes.
of how the world is turning against Israel. Is there any resource that you would recommend for us to take a look at?
Yes. One of the easily available resources, I'll go with the easily available as far as news agencies are concerned. Al Jazeera actually, on a very simple level, has been reporting a lot of these numbers even before this conflict for a long time. Al Jazeera is actually somebody who is, I think, going to be recognized as the forefront of, at least on a international news level, that reported pretty honestly and pretty accurately. There's personalities which I advise people to follow, someone such as a brother who emerged, you probably heard of him, Sami Hamdi. Sami Hamdi is actually a political strategical advisor. He's advised prime ministers of the Muslim world, and he's a consultant. He has his own newsletter, and he actually documents a lot of statistics. I use a lot of his statistics which he cites very heavily. Believe it or not, one of the places I go now to specialized, and people advise me to, and I found it very, very helpful, is the Haaretz and the newspapers that are within Israel that are against this conflict, that are actually on board with Human Rights Watch organizations. So Beit Salam is also a Human Rights Watch organization that is actually Jewish, which is actually Israeli, which reports pretty accurately from my understanding. The UN numbers are okay, just kind of scratching the surface, but I would really refer to Human Rights Watch also, and just human rights agencies in general. Beit Salam being in specific, if you need to cite, because it's not coming from a Muslim resource. And they're reporting actually, Muslim resources are actually utilizing a lot of their numbers. And they know that, so they're actually ramping up and amping up their research and their funding. Egyptian Red Cross has actually been working with many organizations to get, because there was a scare of how is this humanitarian aid going to be coming in. Egyptian Red Cross is actually working pretty heavily with Turkey to mobilize and the border. I think there's a timed border opening, but they've actually timed it pretty well as of recent. But yeah, I think that's just something to keep you busy. But the good thing about, I can't remember a lot of the citations, but Sami Hamdi is actually a very, very good a resource that he cites. The Intercept, surprisingly, has been reporting pretty well. And the Intercept has been, I don't want to say blowing up, but the Intercept has been very, very active, especially after the disavowing and the separation of Sami Hamdi, of Mehdi Hassan. And as of recent, CARE, because of the White House saying that we disavow ourselves from CARE now, because of I didn't bring my phone with me, but I had it written down, I had the article open. Because of CARE, Nihad Awad saying, if I'm not mistaken, it's on New York Times and everything, and CNN, saying that it is refreshing to see that those people who were shackled and the people who were under oppression breaking free. Something to that. They have it in quotations on all the web. So CARE, which was once somebody who was kind of a liaison between the legal world and Muslims in the United States, is now being disavowed, and it needed a reason to be. The UAE considered CARE to be a terrorist organization 4 or 5 years ago, because of its quote-unquote links to the Muslim Brotherhood. And since Muslim Brotherhood is considered a terrorist organization in the UAE and many parts of the Muslim world, Nihad Awad did the same thing of CARE to dishearten. This is a move from Israel. I know you didn't ask about this. This is a move from the helpers of Israel. Don't think that Israel doesn't push some buttons too. It does. The contract that it has with America is you help us push our narrative, and we help keep surveilling the Middle East for you. You want the Middle East, you want the trillions of dollars, depend on us, but you have to work for us too. Control the narrative for us. Let the media know what we want, and it's going to be our mouthpiece, right? In the same way, the White House, when it comes from the White House, it's not actually completely coming from the White House. It's the White House trying to kind of satisfy Israel, but the White House is in a difficult situation right now. Elections are coming up, an all-time low. When's the last time you heard a president's name changed to genocide? Genocide Joe, right? It's a crazy situation where he has to make an excuse by saying, I'm not going to run. If Donald Trump doesn't run, I'm not going to run. He has to say this to save his legacy. There's no president who had a legacy who's going to be as tarnished as Joe Biden ever in American history, because it all unfolded in his time. Remember, Allah does everything for however he wants at the timing that he wants. So he has to go out acting like, when you're about to get fired, you say, oh, I was going to quit anyway. That's kind of what he's doing now, right? Very, very weird situation. So CARE now is going to be pushed away, and Israel, with the permission of the Americans, is saying, aha, maybe this will work against the Muslims to push their morale, because this was only the legal entity that was a civil rights entity, civil legality for the Muslims in the United States, so let's disavow them, right? They're turning the knobs here and there. But Muslims know after this conflict, Israel doesn't control anything. The Muslim rulers don't control anything. It's you and I, obviously Allah first, but Allah will use us, and I think He used us. Oh, Allah, make us amongst those whom you used in this conflict, in this genocide against the Palestinians. But Allah can change that whenever He wants. But as of right now, I feel much more empowered than those people have. In the Muslim world, and the civilians in all of humanity feel much more empowered by overturning this narrative. And the reason I'm mentioning that as far as CARE is going to be a buzzword, I think, for the next week. And those people who are covering this issue with CARE are going to be lots of groups that are citing lots of events that are occurring and unfolding in Palestine and Gaza, and in extension, how it affects us here. A lot of people are talking about voting and how it's going to affect all this. Yeah, the political process is very much hindered now. It's a crazy shakeup where it's going to be used. Vivek Ramaswamy is using this against Joe Biden and the Democrats, and now all this stuff came out about the Democrats that, people didn't know. They always thought that they were on the Muslim side. Of the top 10 receivers of the Israeli lobby were all Democrats in the millions of dollars. The number one was somebody who was accumulated about $1.3 million from, I think, a year, or in this term, don't quote me for it, but the top 10 recipients of the Israeli lobby were the Democrats, right? So they play this double-sided game here to appease. They're very good at appeasing. So the whole world is shaken up by this. We don't know what the future is, obviously, but what we know is that whatever we're doing, we can't stop. We have to keep doing. Don't be disillusioned by people saying that CARE is not going to be helping or whatever the case. It doesn't matter. Allah's always been the helper. Yes, sir.
What is the Christianity in his beliefs? If not, is the nation for his saving? Some Christianity, the Yehudi, they came by. They have beliefs and things.
They believe that, yes. When there's nobody else left except for the Jews, that's when Jesus is going to come. That's what you're talking about? They believe that the Christians, especially the evangelical,
There's a two-part, right? In Christianity like that.
meaning that the Christians believe in some of their beliefs, not all Christians, but the ones who are actually Zionists. Christian Zionism was before Judaic Zionism, right? So the first Zionists were actually Christians, meaning as far as promoting moving of Israel, needing Israel to move. There's a religious aspect for this to them, which is that we need all the Jews to move back to the homeland, and upon then, and expelling everybody else, so Christians are involved in this, Jesus is going to come. So the Jews don't care about Isa alayhi salam, wal-iyadhu billah, right? They don't believe in him. But they're using the Christians' rhetoric of, we need all the Jews back in the homeland, right? Where in reality, the Christians are like, we know when Isa comes that he's going to kill all of these Jews because he hates the Jews. So they're both using each other for worldly gain, but they both are against each other. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mentions that you think, تَحْسَبُهُمْ, you actually believe full well that their hearts are joined together. وَقُلُوبُهُمْ شَتَّى. Their hearts are actually very disjoined. They're very disunited, right? That's their situation. So they actually want people to migrate. The Christian Zionists, not all Christians, Christian Zionists want the Jews to migrate because they want Isa alayhi salam to come. And the Jews are like, yeah, bring it on. That's what we need, right? But at the same time, the Jews don't believe in Isa alayhi salam, right? So it's a twisted love story. Yes?
I see it like two narrative now. Today you're giving the narrative that the Christian is the one who created the Jews and the slave. But the other narrative, the Jews who created the angelical one to get them. The Jews who is controlling United States and convince the leadership that you need this, just to give the support. So that it seems to be reversing that, or maybe different kind of.
No, so there's multiple sides to this, yeah.
And in reality, what we see, like the need for the Jews, it's from even our own religion. They're gonna come there, so that it's not like the Christian created them, and the Jews themselves. Some of them they say, "Do not go there. This is our end." They know that, so that I believe of the other side of the narrative, the one who created and convinces to the Biden that if no Israel, we have to create Israel.
Yeah.
They put this one, they put them to say this because they need that continuous. So that I believe in the other narrative, not the one.
No, I believe. I believe.
Because really, they're the one who moving far with this thing. It's not like
No, I. There,
simpler than these people.
no, I know, but I think you're right. I think there is a narrative, but there's multiple layers to this, right? I don't think the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is complicated. It's very, very simple. They came there. Palestinians are refugees in their own country. They have an apartheid state over them, and Israelis have painted themselves as the victims while they've been performing atrocities, committing genocidal atrocities on the Palestinians. The whole world believed it. And when the Palestinians react, they consider them terrorists. But there's the narrative here is number one, and these are prophesized, you're right. So think about all these different issues that are all coming together. Islam has prophesized about this. The evangelical Christians themselves are a part of this whole organization of making sure that the Jews come also, right? And wallahu alam, that this is one of the, when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam foretells this, he can be referring to the fitan, like when Ibn Majah in his Kitab al-Fitan refers to the fitan in the books of hadith, Palestine is in it, right? So, but we never knew what it was going to look like. We didn't know that these people were going to collude together, even though they hated each other, for the sake of this. But Isa alayhi salam is going to come and he's going to free himself from both of these people, right? They think that they're actually controlling. You know, there's somebody, the book is called I think Speeding Up or Hastening the Hand of God or something. That's what they refer to it as, is that the Christians want the Jews to move in. There's a book that was written about this because they want the arrival of Jesus. But look at the other side, a layer to this is the countries that are surrounding were actually never wanting to do anything because they don't. If Israel, like it's coming to the level of political analysts are saying that these people have no hayat whatsoever. I'm talking about the governments that are supporting the help of Israel with their contracts with America of taking in refugees. Egypt's supposed to take a certain amount, Bahrain's supposed to take a certain amount as perks that were given to these countries by the United States. That's why refugees happen, refugees occur, right? And that's why the countries are open to it. Some of the people may not be okay with it. That always happens. Look, I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but in the United States, people are complaining, especially the far right, of why are all these refugees coming to our country? They're taking our jobs, they're taking up our space, our food. But the question they never asked was, why are those refugees in this country? Because of us, because of the United States, because of our taxpayer money, right? We caused that corruption and stuff to happen. So America has to make deals that we will take these refugees, but we have to continue this to get this oil, to get this nickel, to get this gold, to get whatever the case is, the diamond. So in the same way, if Israel gets obliterated, the Muslim countries are actually fighting and bidding to who's going to take Israel's spot to be America's lapdog in the Middle East. We thought that they were going to help us. They're not there to help us.
They already Israel, or more than Israel. They do much more than what they do. But what I'm saying,
They're protecting the borders. Yeah.
that what SubhanAllah was saying, like, وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ.
Allah khair al-makirin.
What happened in September 11? I feel it's insider job, and look what happened. Everybody started to know what is Islam, how about Islam.
Yes, you're right.
They got to know much more about this one. This one, I don't want to sound or anyone to understand me or whatever, that I'm doing mukhaddil or tahdeel. It could be another insider job. In Israel, what happened in Hamas or that conflict on October 7, because it does not make sense that much, and it looks like it is a plan just to go for war.
Yeah.
So that it is like the other narrative. Yes, we have mujahideen, we have believers, we have true mujahideen went into this one, we lost, but we lost them, but inshallah they're martyrs, so that I'm not worried about them. But still, sometimes
Of course.
you look at it like it is insider jobs,
Yeah.
because they need to bring this one. They went further. They went further because Allah wants to expose you. Allah wants to.
Subhanallah.
This is your Makkah. You want to do this one? This is what I have in the Quran before, and the Prophet said, "La tuqatilunna al-yahud antum shaqqinahum rabiyyu," and something in that sense. So that it's coming. And even Sha'rawi one day, he was giving a speech, and one of the Arifin, or the one who has the knowledge, when the Israelis enter Al-Aqsa Mosque, he did sujood shukr. And everybody looked at him, what's going on? You're doing sujood? He said,
Subhanallah.
now, this is the truth that the Prophet 1400 years ago
Allahu
said
Akbar.
that one, and this is what Allah is saying. So that it's going to happen. I do not care how it's going to happen. We need to continue to do whatever our part. We need to support our brothers and sisters. We need to give better narratives, expose the Israelis, support any media outlets that talk about them. But definitely, subhanallah, what we're saying, 20,000, 30,000 killed, these are shuhada. Inshallah, we're not worried. Shuhada are fil Jannah. We're not worried, but look how many start to be Palestinian. Even they're not Arab, they're not Muslims, anything they say, I'm Palestinian.
Yeah.
So that alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ.
Allah khair al-makirin.
We leave it to Allah Azza wa Jal. I'm not rushing to have the victory because it's going to happen. Allahu Alam how. Maybe Israeli inside themselves they exploded. Maybe the West will abandon them. Maybe they will go against them. We do not know. I'm not believing that our people, our kings and leaders, they're going to do it. It's going to happen differently with Allah. With Allah's will. I don't know how, but
Only Allah knows, you're right.
I'm a believer that it's going to happen. Sooner or later it's going to happen, but may Allah make it easy.
Allah bless you for your heart, brother. جزاكم الله خيرا. نعم حضراتكم. تفضل.
جزاك الله خير.
أي جزاك الله خير.
Okay, so I feel the urgency of the situation right now is lost. That there is the situation right now is very humanitarian. The humanitarian situation into Palestine. There is a disaster that is developing. The disaster is developing. That we have 2 million people. 2 million people that hundreds of thousands of them are in the north, north of the Gaza sector, and that north is cut off from the south and cut off from the daily support that comes in. The daily support that comes in from mostly from the trucks and humanitarian support from that passes from Egypt is 1/4
Yeah.
what is required.
Subhanallah.
So the food, these 2 million people now, all their trees are burned, all the resources, animals are killed, farms are destroyed, water is cut off because water, most of it comes from within Israel, so that is cut off from the north. Electricity is cut off, so their factories, even their resources like sewage is depends on fuel and depends on electricity. So those are cut off. So there are hundreds of thousands in the north that are cut off. They don't have food. The water is running out, and those people can be killed in thousands per day from the lack of support. Add to that the health situation. The hospitals, 1/3 of the hospitals are working, and those hospitals that are working, the number of injured are in tens of thousands.
Overwhelming, yeah.
Yeah, so the hospital capacity
Yeah.
in Gaza was 3,000 beds. Now 1,000 are working, and those 1,000 they don't
Alhamdulillah.
have anesthetics, they don't have medications. The doctors, many doctors are killed. So you see the situation from the health situation, and the number of injured right now is over 40,000. With 3,000 beds in the hospital, you have 40,000 injured. So some people can get a small injury and they can bleed to death because nobody will treat them, because nobody will be able to get to them from under the rubble so that they can be treated. So the situation right now is that people are dying and the situation is urgent, and it can develop into a much worse situation quickly. And we don't see that urgency. I mean, the UN Secretary General has got this Article 99. Yeah, and this is done if he sees a world crisis that is affecting the world peace. So this is Article 99 of the UN. So he invoked that article to call for a ceasefire and a humanitarian assistance to Gaza. And today, the U.S. vetoed that decision. So, I mean, this article was used, the last time it was used was in 1989, and it was used yesterday. He used the article yesterday. He brought the Security Council to discussion, and the U.S. vetoed